In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Each year we wait anxiously for this great feast day of the Mother of God. The feast day of her Dormition, of her falling asleep. And as I've also said to you many other times, every time we fulfill one of the feast days for the year, thank the Lord for that He may also grant you another year to see that particular feast. This one is especially close to us because it also is the feast day for our mission, for our chapel. I am sure that the Orthodox people know about the history of the Mother of God and what happened at her Dormition. But for those that don't, and mainly for those who might hear this, who are not of an Orthodox confession and may not know this history, let me just quickly go through it for you to actually fill in all the different details. After Pentecost, the Mother of God joined with the apostles in missionary work, traveling around to various nations, evangelizing, and with the apostles building churches and parishes, ordaining clergy and all such things. She is the one responsible for the choosing of Mount Athos, the future stronghold of Orthodox monasticism, male monasticism in the world, which endures with greatness to this day. Some 20 to 25 years she went about in this missionary work, and when she understood that the time of her Dormition was at hand, her falling asleep, her dying, she begged her son to come and take her soul and take it so that the demonic realm which tempts a soul after death will not harm her. Of course, being her son, he had absolute right to take her soul, and particularly because it was sinless, there was nothing really to judge in her or to tempt her with. And indeed, when she did fall asleep, the Lord personally took her soul, leaving her body on earth for the apostles to bury. They were scattered around the world and miraculously caught up on clouds from various nations, came to Gethsemane to bury her body, which they did. And to this day, that tomb where she was is a great part of pilgrimage, Orthodox pilgrimage, and has been for hundreds and hundreds of years. Poor Thomas, apostle, wasn't there, like he wasn't there in the first Sunday when Christ came into the closed room. He was evangelizing in India and arrived on the third day and insisted on seeing the body of the Mother of God to venerate it. So they obliged him and opened the tomb. When they opened it, her body was not there. And from his witness and others, we can say that the Lord himself resurrected her and took her body to the heavenly realm with full glory before the general resurrection of the dead and the great judgment. So she is the only one that has been fully glorified. Thomas was gifted her cincture, sort of a belt from her as a consolation as she passed on to the heavenly realm. And that has been kept as a holy relic in Orthodox churches, in the Orthodox Church. Now, the question remains, why? Why was these things happening to her? In order to answer that properly, somewhat, we need to go back really to the creation of things, particularly to the creation of humankind, back to Adam and Eve. And as you know, Adam was created from the earth, from the dust, from the soil. Eve was created from his flesh, from his rib. Therefore, she's a higher form of creation, stands above him in a certain sense, which manifests itself in being more spiritually astute and more understanding in those things. But on account of the fallen nature which they brought upon themselves, the women also have problems discerning what is right and wrong, even though they are very quick to hook onto spiritual entities. Everybody, every intelligent creature born or brought into earth, created or whichever way, has to undergo a trial to see whether they will be following the Lord or not, whether they will be loyal to the Lord or not. Even Christ underwent such a trial up on the mount where Satan came to test him. And therefore Adam and Eve also had to undergo this trial, and they blew it. The trial was simple. You have all these wonderful fruits to partake of by which you will learn theology and understanding of God's nature and all those sorts of things. There's only one that you're not to partake of now, because you are in a state of immaturity. Although your body is adult, your heart, your mind, your soul is still a childlike, and therefore you cannot partake of that until you are more mature in your ways. Of course, the wily serpent, who did he tempt? He tempted Eve and got her to transgress, and she, being part of his flesh, part of his rib, near his heart, fell for her and did the same thing. That's one point. But the most important point is that when the Lord called them to repentance, they didn't. And that's what ushered in this fallen nature. Fallen nature, just to remind you, is the tyranny of the passions, the sorrows, the sighings, the sicknesses, all those things that we suffer on earth. And finally death. And no one escapes that. Christ never escaped it. The Mother of God never escaped it. No holy person has escaped it. Those that were being taken to heaven in life form, like Prophet Elias and that, will still come to earth and will face death one way or another. So they fell into what we understand to be this fallen nature of all things, the whole cosmos, not just their bodies, not just their souls, but everything. In other words, everything rots, everything decays, everything goes to a lower and lower form of existence. If you studied physics at any time, you will know that this is what they call entropy, increase in entropy, right? As entropy increases, everything tends to decay. And the only way to keep going is to pour more energy into it, more resources into it. But there's only so much you can do. And so over the centuries, the earth has gone down further and further and further down that way. Because mankind was the pinnacle of creation, made in the image and likeness of God, the Lord could not leave mankind in that state, but had to redeem him somehow. And the Holy Trinity worked out that redemption by sacrificing the Logos, the Son of God, sacrificing him in the sense of him taking on full humanity, becoming a man forever and ever and ever. As I've often said, the potter becomes one of the pots, not just for 33 years or something, or for a few centuries, but forever. In other words, our God is a man, wholly divine and fully human. He too, because the Mother of God inherited the fallen nature from her parents, he too inherited the fallen nature from her. But of course, he lived sinless life, being also divine. The Mother of God also lived a sinless life. And that's why the answer to that question is, why was she given such honor? Because at an early age she made a vow, something like 3 years old, to live in purity and chastity all her life. And by that she entered into the temple for some 10 odd years or more and stayed there with the other virgins, which was a tradition to do. Archangel Gabriel, seeing her zeal for that, was assisting her in that, teaching her spiritual life, theology, and all those sorts of things. And she grew in that Christ likeness, or what we call deification, more and more, and never ever, not in the slightest bit, transgress any of the precepts of God, any of the commandments or anything like this, despite the fact that she had that fallen nature which could terrorize her with the passions in various ways, tempt her. And indeed she did suffer. Even when Christ was being crucified, as it said, the sword will go through your heart. The suffering of that fallen nature which she experienced. However, by the year 12, by the time she became 12 or 13, it was no longer appropriate for her or the other virgins at that age to stay in the temple, and usually they were given over to an elderly person to look after them for as long as they lived, so that they could continue in the vow. The vow that they make. The vow is to live that life of purity and virginity all her life and never break it. That's the Orthodox understanding of part of her life. Therefore, she becomes, to us, the quintessential example of how to conduct spiritual life such that it leads to this transfiguration, to this deification, to this Christ-likeness, to this return of the state of Adam before the fall. And that's what Christ came to establish by his redemptive work. That, and only that, to return humankind to that pure state in which they were created. And by that to achieve immortality forever. Having done that, it only is sort of logical that she did not have to pass through the great judgment which is still to come, because there's nothing to judge her on. Moreover, the different Christian confessions have a totally different approach to this, none of which are correct. None. In fact, they are bordering in many cases on blasphemy and actually derogatory of Christ and the Mother of God. For example, most of the Protestants can't stand the Theotokos. They believe that she bore Christ and then had other children with Elder Joseph, her caretaker, who was over 80 years old, and she was around 12, 13. Stupid idea. Moreover, they were not married, but they were betrothed, which was the way by which the society ensured that there'd be no scandal by living in that sort of situation, preserving herself in purity and being looked after, that nobody would impinge upon her life as such. The opposite of this, the Roman Catholics go overboard in the opposite direction. They, only about 150 years ago or whatever, invented this thing called Immaculate Conception. Strange. What they say is that when she was conceived from her parents that had the fallen nature, the Lord zapped her and made her so she could never transgress and never sin. Does that sound to you like a new creation, a new creature that's no longer human? They might look human, they might be a humanoid, but that's a new creature, because never can anyone be created like that, being the regular human being that we know. Never. Moreover, under that state, there'd be no test to see how loyal you are to God, because you're already zapped to be fully divine, fully pure in all respects, and you don't have to worry about anything. That also smells like some sort of zombie, if you think about it. Program, you can program a computer to do something. She's programmed to be unable to transgress according to that heresy of Immaculate Conception. It's understandable that they went this way because Roman Catholicism lost spiritual life many centuries ago, and they lost the idea of striving for deification, for becoming transfigured, becoming holy, sanctified through keeping of the precepts, the commandments that the Lord has given us. It makes sense that they went this way, as they have with about another 40, 50 heresies that they invented. Therefore they do a great dishonour to her, because they take away from her her virtues. You know, the virtues are that she managed to live this life all her life, never transgressing at all. She knew how to conduct unseen warfare, how to conduct spiritual life correctly, never transgressing. That's why she becomes to us the best example of that. And that's why to this day, many, many monasteries are dedicated to her in one way or another, as well as parishes, people's homes, and even people's names. That's the big difference. The Roman Catholics will argue with you blue and black or whatever about this Immaculate Conception, not understanding the consequences of such an idea, a silly idea. And you think that these so-called theologians there in Rome or whatever, you know, with all their degrees and their so-called intelligence, could see that this is so ridiculous, so stupid, excuse me the expression, to come up with this idea, which was never given in since Pentecost. Moreover, the Mother of God, which spent over 20 years with the apostles, told them the details of her life with Christ, which she kept hidden in her heart. As it says in the Gospel, she kept hers hidden in her heart, to be revealed after Christ's ascension, which she did in detail. And that's why we have her life in detail coming down from us, from the apostles who wrote it, who related to it, passed it on in various ways, some written, some orally, some captured in dogma, some in the ecumenical councils that arose, but mostly for our days in the services. Today, for example, where every verse is dedicated to the Mother of God in Matins and Vespers and those services. But every day during the cycle of services, when we have those Matins, Vespers, hours, all that, every third verse dedicates to the Mother of God and gives a new picture of her life in one way or another, details. It's never repeated on a daily basis. Only the next year will be repeated on that day. The services in general are full of this. This is where we get a lot of our understanding about lives of saints and what they did. And people outside Orthodoxy seek references to it. You know, what reference have you got to this? How do you come to that? Well, go and listen to the services and you'll understand. And those services date back to the first years of Pentecost. Such as this great feast, it's traditional to have her shroud put out in the church for veneration and for various walks to be done outside. Unfortunately, we live in this sort of world where it's not always easy to do that with a parish. But nevertheless, you must understand her greatness in not only her showing a spiritual life, but her unceasing intercession for us in various ways. Very much so. And there's nothing wrong with that. She, being so close to God, so close to Christ, is elated to make intercessions on us who are still struggling. This is the other thing that those outside Orthodoxy can't understand. The saints love making intercessions for those still struggling on earth. It's part of being human. It's part of giving, like to the poor, you know, helping them up the ladder to the kingdom of heaven. Always remember her in your prayers, and all our prayers, morning, evening, and others, are dedicated to her. When she was with the apostles, they would regularly put out a place for her at the table. And she would talk, and they would listen and take these things down. And to this day, in many monasteries, and also in some parishes, whenever there is a meal, a place is set aside for the Theotokos, because noetically she's there, mystically she's there, even though you may not see her body, but some do. One last thing. Today on earth, she visits 3 places every day and is seen. She is seen. The first one is Sarov, or Divieva, where Saint Seraphim established the monastery. There is a sort of a ditch that goes around the monastery, quite long, maybe about 2 or 3 kilometres, and she's often seen walking along that, and pilgrims come and walk along that. She also appears in Georgia, which is one of the places that she also chose for sanctification with Christianity. The other place is Gethsemane, I think it is. In any case, every day this happens. The Mother of God sanctifies those places on earth that she loved, and where great things were done in her time and continue to this day. God help us to always remember her, to always venerate her, and to ensure that we are able to give a good report to anyone who asks about her, and to put them right so that they don't trample upon her virtue like the Roman Catholics do, or completely end up hating her because they think she became a loose woman and had many children by an 80-year-old. Strange. By the way, those children, if you don't know, were the children of Elder Joseph from his marriage when he's deposed. He was a widower. 7 children, all adults when Christ was born. So how can they be siblings? Impossible. God help you, preserve you, protect you, Lord Jesus.